Imagine being forced to perform in front of your entire class, not to celebrate your talent, but to be mocked for who you are. That's exactly what happened to Jamal, a quiet 14-year-old boy, whose teacher thought she could humiliate him. But what happened next stunned everyone in the room, because instead of shame, Jamal gave them a performance that turned his humiliation into a standing ovation. "Get up and play something for us," the teacher sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The classroom froze. The usual chatter died instantly, and the only sound left was the faint hum of the overhead fan. Every head turned toward Jamal, the quiet 14-year-old who always tried to blend into the back row. His stomach twisted. This wasn't the first time Ms. Parker had singled him out. All year, she had found subtle ways to remind him that she didn't. I believe he belonged there, making comments about how kids like him weren't really made for refined things like classical music. But today was different. Today, she wasn't content with just whispers or side remarks. She wanted a spectacle. With a smug grin, she lifted her chin and gestured toward the gleaming grand piano in the corner of the room. "Since you think you're so smart, let's see if you even know how to play this." Or maybe, her lips curled into a smirk, "You'd prefer to rap instead?" A few students laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that came from joy. It was the nervous kind. The kind that came when no one dared to challenge the teacher, even if they knew she was wrong. Some kids glanced at Jamal with pity, others with curiosity, wondering if he'd embarrass himself. Jamal felt his face heat up, his ears burning as the weight of the room pressed down on him. His fingers fidgeted against the edge of his desk. He wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear entirely. But beneath that wave of humiliation, there was something else, something deeper. Ms. Parker thought she had cornered him, but she had no idea. Jamal wasn't just another kid being forced into the spotlight, because what she didn't know was that Jamal had a secret. Late at night, when the world was quiet, Jamal would sit at his grandmother's old upright piano. The keys were chipped, the sound slightly out of tune, but to him it was magic. His grandmother had been the one to teach him, patiently guiding his hands when he was barely tall enough to reach the keys. She used to tell him, "Music is your weapon. Jamal, they can laugh at you, but they can't take away your gift." Now, sitting in that classroom with Ms. Parker staring him down, those words echoed in his head. His heart pounded, but his resolve hardened. She wanted a show. She was about to get one she'd never forget. Jamal had grown up in a house where music wasn't just background noise, it was life itself. His late grandmother, who had raised him since he was little, was the heart of that music. She wasn't a professional pianist, but she had a deep love for classical piano. Every evening after homework and dinner, she would sit Jamal down beside her and guide his tiny hands across the keys. They didn't have much. Money was always tight, and piano lessons from a real instructor were out of the question. But his grandmother believed in him so fiercely that she refused to let poverty rob him of talent. She scraped and saved every spare dollar until finally, one day, she managed to buy a second-hand piano. It wasn't shiny or new. The wood was scratched, and some of the keys stuck, but to Jamal, it was the most beautiful gift in the world. While other kids from his neighborhood spent their afternoons shooting hoops, playing video games, or hanging out at the park, Jamal found his joy at the piano. Hours would pass as he practiced scales, studied pieces, and let his emotions flow through music. When he was happy, he played light and playful melodies. When he was sad, his fingers moved with haunting grace, filling the room with notes that spoke of loss and love. Over the years, Jamal became more than just good. He became extraordinary. He could play Mozart as easily as breathing, lose himself in Beethoven's stormy sonatas, and even improvise his own music that left his grandmother in tears. His gift was undeniable, but in school, Jamal kept that side of himself hidden. He knew too well how people like Ms. Parker looked at him. They didn't expect a black boy from his background to appreciate classical music, let alone master it. And Jamal didn't feel the need to prove himself to anyone, not until the day she forced his hand. So when Ms. Parker called him up to the piano, she thought she was exposing him, setting him up for ridicule in front of the class. She expected him to stumble, to confirm her low opinion of him. But Jamal didn't see humiliation. He saw a stage, an opportunity, a chance to show everyone once and for all who he really was. Jamal rose from his chair slowly, his footsteps echoing louder in his ears than they actually were. Every step toward the piano felt like a mile, with dozens of eyes following his every move. His classmates whispered in hushed tones, some expecting him to crash and burn, others watching with the kind of curiosity reserved for car wrecks. No one really believed he could play. At the front of the room, Ms. Parker stood with her arms tightly crossed, her smirk widening as if she was savoring every second. To her, this was entertainment. She thought she had cornered him, trapped him in a moment that would end with laughter at his expense. Jamal sat down on the bench. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling, not from fear but from anticipation. For a brief second, the entire classroom was silent. The only sound was his steady breathing as he centered himself, remembering his grandmother's words. When you sit at the piano, the world has to listen. Then, with a calm certainty, Jamal pressed down on the first keys. The opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata floated through the room like a spell, soft, haunting, delicate, yet carrying an emotional weight that grabbed everyone instantly. The giggles that had bubbled up from the back row evaporated in an instant. The casual smirks vanished. One by one, the students leaned forward, their eyes widening as they realized what was happening. This wasn't a simple children's tune. This wasn't a clumsy attempt at faking skill. This was mastery. Jamal's fingers glided across the keys, weaving a melody that seemed to fill the air itself. Each note was deliberate, layered with emotion, his grief, his strength, his quiet defiance. It was as if he was speaking to them all without saying a single word. And then came the real shift. Ms. Parker's smug expression, the one she had worn so proudly just moments earlier, began to falter. Her smirk loosened, her brow furrowed, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't prepared for this. Jamal wasn't being humiliated. He was commanding the room. By the time he reached the middle of the piece, the classroom was completely silent, not out of awkwardness, but out of awe. Jamal had transformed the moment. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was his voice, and it was louder than every insult ever thrown his way. As the music swelled, Jamal's entire being seemed to merge with the piano. His fingers danced effortlessly over the keys, not just playing notes, but telling a story. Every rise and fall in the melody carried a piece of him, the sting of every insult, the weight of every doubt cast upon him, the memory of nights when he sat alone at the piano, guided only by the echo of his grandmother's voice. The song grew deeper, more intense. Some students who had started with folded arms now found themselves leaning forward, unable to look away. The haunting chords gripped their hearts, demanding their attention. A few students even swallowed hard, caught off guard by the raw emotion flowing out of someone they thought they knew. Jamal wasn't just performing, he was laying his soul bare for all to see. Each note screamed of his struggles, whispered of his losses, and roared of his determination to rise above every barrier placed in his way. His music spoke in a language beyond words, one that every person in that classroom could feel, even if they couldn't explain it. Then came the final passage. Jamal slowed his breathing, steadied his hands, and with a flourish, he struck the last chord. The sound lingered in the air, rich and powerful, vibrating in every chest, echoing against every wall, and then silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom, but the heavy electric silence of people utterly stunned. Nobody dared to move. Nobody dared to laugh. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe, suspended in the gravity of what they had just witnessed. A full 3 seconds passed before reality returned, and then suddenly the room erupted. The applause came fast and loud like a wave breaking through the tension. Students clapped furiously, some even rising from their chairs in disbelief. "That was incredible," one shouted. "Go, Jamal!" Another cheered. A few even whistled, their earlier doubts replaced with admiration. Meanwhile, Ms. Parker's face drained of color. The smirk she had worn so confidently was gone, replaced by pale shock. She had expected him to stumble, to embarrass himself, to confirm her prejudice. But instead, Jamal had turned the moment on its head. She hadn't exposed his weakness. He had revealed his brilliance. Ms. Parker blinked rapidly, her composure slipping with every second of the students' cheers. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it cracked as she stammered, Well, that was unexpected." It was the best she could come up with, but her words fell flat. The class, still buzzing with excitement, wasn't buying it. Unexpected? That was amazing, one student called out, his voice cutting through the awkward tension. Jamal, you're incredible! Another shouted, clapping even louder. Soon the room was alive with praise, students turning toward Jamal, applauding, smiling, some even looking at him with newfound respect. For once, the spotlight wasn't on Ms. Parker's authority, but on Jamal's undeniable talent. Ms. Parker's jaw tightened. She forced a strained smile, but her eyes betrayed her. She had lost control of the narrative. What she had intended as a humiliating spectacle had become a stage for brilliance, and everyone knew it. Her carefully maintained superiority, the subtle jabs, the mocking tone, it all collapsed in an instant. The prejudice she had tried to mask under sarcasm was now laid bare in front of the very students she was supposed to guide. Jamal didn't gloat. He didn't need to. While the class celebrated him, he stood silently, letting the music he had played speak louder than anything words could. Slowly, he turned from the piano and walked back to his seat. His steps were steady, calm, and deliberate. Every eye followed him, not with pity, not with doubt, but with respect. When he finally sat down, he lifted his head, his back straight, his face calm. For the first time, Jamal wasn't the boy hiding in the shadows of the back row. He was the boy who had just silenced his bully, not with anger, not with fists, but with pure talent and dignity. Miss Parker cleared her throat, fumbling with her lesson notes, trying to move on. But the energy in the room had shifted permanently. The students no longer looked at her the same way. The power she held over them had cracked, and it was Jamal who had changed the balance. In that single performance, Jamal had turned the tables. The teacher who tried to break him ended up exposing her own weakness. While Jamal revealed his strength, news of Jamal's performance didn't just stay within the four walls of that classroom, it spread like wildfire throughout the school. By lunchtime, whispers of "Did you hear Jamal play?" echoed in the hallways. Students who had barely noticed him before now approached him with wide smiles and excited voices. Some gave him high fives, others stopped just to say, "Man, that was unbelievable." For the first time, Jamal wasn't invisible. He wasn't just the quiet kid in the back. He was the student everyone wanted to know. Even teachers took notice. Word reached the faculty lounge, and soon, instructors from other classes began inviting Jamal to play. One even asked if he would consider performing at the upcoming school assembly. For Jamal, it felt surreal. The thing he had always hidden, the part of himself he thought no one would ever appreciate, was suddenly the very thing that made him shine. For once, Jamal felt seen, not for the color of his skin, not for the stereotypes people tried to pin on him, but for the gift he carried inside. His music wasn't just entertainment, it was proof of who he was, of the countless hours he had poured into his craft, of the love his grandmother had instilled in him. As for Ms. Parker, the incident marked the beginning of the end for her carefully crafted image. Students no longer feared her biting remarks. Parents, outraged by the story, complained to the principal. And soon enough, the school board stepped in, questioning her behavior and reviewing her actions. Her sarcasm, once overlooked, was now evidence of her prejudice. Her authority had cracked, and she could no longer hide behind it. But for Jamal, this wasn't about revenge. He didn't smile at her downfall, nor did he brag about his triumph. What happened that day was bigger than humiliation or payback. It was a turning point in his life. Jamal realized that his music wasn't just a secret hobby to keep. Locked away, it was his voice. A voice that demanded respect, no matter who tried to silence him. And so, the boy who had once been mocked became unforgettable. Years later, people wouldn't remember Ms. Parker's smirk. They would remember Jamal, the boy who turned a moment of humiliation into a standing ovation, and in doing so proved that true talent always rises above prejudice. And that's how Jamal turned humiliation into triumph. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.